Is Sony really about to go back to the PS4? It's the end of an era for the PlayStation 5. The time has once again come to upgrade your SSD. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. This is the weekend update here on the channel. My game of choice right now is Skyrim. I know Starfield's out. I put a ton of hours into it, but Bethesda just put out a news story that said that they're actually going to patch in some stuff I'd rather wait for. So I went to the next best thing, a 500th playthrough of Skyrim. But yeah, that's what I'm playing right now. Let me know what you're playing down in the comments below. The first thing I wanted to talk about today is the fact that it looks like Sony is once again going back to the well of the PlayStation 4. So this week, there was a big news story out about how the PS5 got a huge update. It brought along some cool features like being able to mute the beep on the PS5. You could also start using Dolby Atmos. There's some PlayStation app updates, just some like small things that all added up to a big update. Overall, I'd give it like a 7.9 or 8 out of 10, just because I really want themes on my PlayStation 5, and it's weird to have yet another update that does not have themes. But it turns out the PlayStation 5 isn't the only console that gets to join in on the fun, because Sony actually also pushed out an update for the PlayStation 4 that isn't just the security and whatever they call it, security and stability patch they put out every few months. This update actually comes along with a new feature, but don't get too excited. It's nothing crazy. All they're really giving you the ability to do is log into your console with a QR code using the PlayStation app. This is kind of like a new feature that I'm pretty sure Discord started, but when you log into the app, it'll put a QR code on the screen, then you can go into the app and authenticate your login with the app. Now, on my PlayStation 5, I never have to log into the PlayStation Network. I have it set up so I'm always logged in, but some people have multiple accounts on their console, or they switch between multiple different consoles and it makes them log in. So this is actually a useful feature. It's just weird to see Sony going back to the PlayStation 4 and adding stuff like this, because theoretically by this point we should have just moved on from the console altogether in favor of the PlayStation 5. Now, at the beginning of this year, it really seemed like Sony was ready to move on from the PlayStation 4, but then the third parties were not really as ready. Dead Space is a legitimate next-gen game because it needs an SSD. There's a bunch of people who played it on PC with an HDD, and some things that are critically important to the game, like weapons that you pick up, like the Ripper, for example. You get it pretty early on in the game. If you're using an HDD instead of an SSD, that Ripper weapon will just never load in because of how the game is architecturally built. Final Fantasy 16 is another one where I think eventually it will get backported. There have been tons of news stories this week about Square Enix posting like a $200 billion loss on their market evaluation, and people are blaming it on Final Fantasy 16 just because that's the newest, biggest game from them. But if you read any actual articles about it, the game that Square Enix is blaming is stuff like Avengers or Outriders or, I don't know, Babylon's Fall. You know, these games that actually cost a fair bit of money and then they came out and didn't actually make that money back. That's why they're not having record profits. Also, the fact that Final Fantasy 16 is a PlayStation 5 exclusive, it's not at the high end of their sales, which is weird. I'm assuming that's only because, you know, it got 8s and 9s, not a lot of 10s. It's been an amazing year for games. Stuff like Baldur's Gate is out there, and there's just been better stuff, whereas in a normal year like 2022, for example, a 9 and 8 game like Final Fantasy 16 would have hit a lot harder, versus this year where every game that's coming out is an 8 or 9 level game. So because of that, I think we'll see Final Fantasy 16 eventually backported to the PlayStation 4, because the only thing really holding it back is the fact that it's not optimized all that well. Like, it runs at 30 FPS, but it doesn't really hit 30 all the time, and the performance mode doesn't really ever hit 60, so that's frustrating. We've seen that these games can be optimized with the example of Jedi Survivor. I saw a bunch of video breakdowns about the PS5 and Series X patch that the game got. Unfortunately, it runs better on the Series X. It's pretty much a locked 60 across the board, whereas on the PlayStation 5 you do see some frame rate dips, but overall the game is running at a pretty hard locked 60 FPS now at a higher resolution. Like on the PS5, it's running almost always at 1080p and upscaling it because they took out the ray tracing. But yeah, now they're working on backporting the game because they finally finished and optimized it, and it really sucks because it seems like EA is the problem here. I was wondering if Respawn was the company that wanted to get these games out early. They were saying, hey, we got to the finish line, we can release this game in the quarter it's supposed to, and then they did. But the director of Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order just left EA and Respawn, so I'm assuming there's some tension there because they probably just want to move on to the next Fallen Order game in this trilogy, but you know, EA wants wants them to backport it. They want them working on other games. They want to rush these games out the door. I could imagine that would be a very stressful situation. I'm personally really curious if we will eventually see Spider-Man 2 backported to the PlayStation 4. I highly doubt that's going to happen because I feel like this game is Sony's big push to get developers to kind of abandon the PS4 and start making some next-gen games, because Sony is probably realizing that they want to release a next-gen console last year with the PlayStation 5 Pro, and they need games that are going to run better on that console to justify it, and the only ones they have right now are Final Fantasy 16. Really, that's it. The other great next-gen game example, Dead Space, runs at 60 FPS on the PS5, and a game where you could really justify a mid-gen refresh by saying it can run at 60 FPS, Starfield, is not available on PlayStation. So they're really hurting for games that are going to make that console a worthy purchase for most people. It is a consumer-friendly move for sure to keep upgrading the PS4 like this and to give it more features versus just adding in software and stability updates, but you know, I think it's time to cut the cord, right? We're over 2 years into this console's life cycle. We've had the best year for gaming ever pretty much, and now we're finally starting to see at least a few next-gen games. So I'm really hoping that with Resident Evil 9 or the 5 remake or whatever comes next from Capcom, they abandon the PlayStation 4 like we thought they were going to do with Resident Evil 4. And after seeing how that game runs on last-gen consoles, I feel like they should have abandoned it because it's not a lock 30 and it runs at super low resolutions. Like, it is very far past time to just move on from that console and start making some next-gen games. And I really hope we start to see that more and more next year, because right now, the only two I think we have on the horizon just for the next couple months are Spider-Man 2 and Lords of the Fallen. But outside of that, there's very few next-gen only games coming, and I feel like Sony needs to just move on from the PS4 and start focusing on next gen. All right, next up here, let's talk about Cyberpunk 2077, because not only do we have a new patch for the game, patch 2.0, but also Phantom Liberty, the new expansion, is coming out very soon. And I'm just gonna cut straight to the chase. You're going to need a new SSD. We'll start out with the patch though. So this is the last big update that Cyberpunk is going to get before the sequel comes out. They're probably going to do some hot fixes or bug fixes between now and the sequel, but effectively CD Projekt Red and the team that made the expansion, which is a new team here in America, they are moving on to the sequel to Cyberpunk 2077, which is cool. This update, you could argue, is what the game should have had at launch. They've completely reworked the police system where the police will actually chase you now. They don't just spawn like out of view. They also reworked car combat and made it more dynamic. There's new skill trees. They also reworked it to be more like the anime, so where cyberware is what's going to be your defense. You can actually just wear clothes as clothes now. There's skill trees featuring the characters from the show. You can also get cyberpsychosis by doing too many implants. So yeah, it seems like it's going to be more of an RPG and less like GTA. There's also some cool combat stuff featured. And the expansion itself, Phantom Liberty, isn't like an end game expansion. It's like a mid game expansion. So you're going to have to start a new character or already have a save that's around halfway through the game before you can do this expansion. And it looks like it's going to affect some new endings for the game, which is also pretty cool. So I'm personally really excited for this. I love that new United States theme that it has. The idea of the expansion being called Phantom Liberty, going to rescue the president, like that is so 80s fueled, 80s inspired. It reminds me of one of my favorite movies of all time, Escape from New York. So yeah, I am all in on the expansion, but it's going to bring the file size for the game all the way back up to 100 gigabytes. So when the game came out on PS4, I think on PS5 it was over 100 gigs. Then they dropped it down to 60 when they re-released the next gen patch for the game. And then now with the expansion and the new patch 2.0, it's going to be bumped back up to 100 gigs. Thankfully, 2 terabyte SSDs have been on sale a lot lately. You can get them for as low as like 180 bucks. I've seen them go as low as 150. My choices are always going to be the WD Black and the Samsung 980 Pro. My 980 Pro, the 2 terabyte, is still going strong inside my PS5, so that's the one that I use. If you want to use the one that I recommend, that's the one to go with. But I would recommend maybe taking a look at the WD Black 4 terabyte option, because right now on Amazon it's $309, which is close to what 2 terabyte drives were retailing for just a year ago. I think the 4 terabyte drives will fall in price pretty quickly, but that's the best price I've seen. But if you want the peace of mind knowing that you're going to have a lot of space left over, even with stuff like Baldur's Gate 3, which is over 100 gigs, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, which is going to pack in a lot of the stuff from 2, I guarantee you that's going to be pushing 150 or 200 gigabytes. The Crew Motorfest is another huge game. Like, games are getting bigger. I would say go for the 4 terabyte if you just want to have enough space left over. I personally want to get one for my laptop. I would love to have that for that or my Steam Deck. But yeah, if you want to check that out, all the SSDs are linked down in the description. But yeah, I'm really excited for Phantom Liberty. I didn't do a replay gameplay of Cyberpunk when the next gen version came out, I kind of had a feeling that there would be a big expansion and a rework of the skills once the anime came out. So yeah, I was like, I'm just gonna wait for the expansion to come out, and I'm glad I did because they sent out review codes early. Like with Cyberpunk 2077, they knew that game was messed up, so they only sent out PC review codes, and they sent them out really close to the game's launch. Cyberpunk's expansion comes out the 26th, and they've already got review codes out there, and the 2.0 patch is allegedly going to drop early, which is cool as well. So yeah, I would upgrade your SSD because they're cheaper right now. My money's on that 4TB version. Next up here, let's talk about the end of an era for the PlayStation 5, because one of its earliest exclusives, Deathloop, is actually leaving PS Plus Extra on September 19th. It was really weird at the beginning of this generation to get 2 Bethesda exclusives on the PlayStation 5, and that's outside of the fact that Bethesda was acquired by Xbox, because, you know, it is weird for a third-party publisher like Bethesda to put exclusives on the PlayStation 5, especially considering that in the past, a lot of their exclusive content for games like Oblivion, Skyrim, Fallout 3, Xbox was their partner. Like I remember back when Fallout 3 came out, I bought the Xbox 360 version because not only did it get the most advertising, but it also got all of the DLC before the PS3 version of the game, which is still crazy that they even did that to this day. And it really seemed like Deathloop was going to be a thorn in Xbox's side when it came out, because it might be the most overrated game of all time. And I'm definitely saying overrated with kindness, right? Like I think the game is either like an 8, an 8.5, or a 9. It's definitely within that range. I played it back when it came out and it just didn't run very well. I really enjoyed it for what it was because the shooting felt really good. I liked the loot aspect where you could build out a huge arsenal of awesome weapons if you really put the time in, and then if you built your character up, you could go for the end of the game, like that perfect loop, and you could do it in just one go, which is exactly what I did. I did the perfect loop first try, and it felt awesome because I spent the entire game building up my entire like arsenal of weapons. But with that being said, the game didn't run very well. The textures were muddy. The AI is borderline brain dead. Like there are so many criticisms I could levy at that game that make me think it didn't really deserve all the 10 out of 10s it got. And those super high review scores plus word of mouth, I think ultimately hurt the game, because the word of mouth going around was that the game wasn't a 10 out of 10, and that made people not buy it. And then eventually it ended up on Game Pass and PlayStation Plus Extra, so people just waited to play it for free. And eventually with the whole Bethesda acquisition, it ended up on Game Pass, it ended up on PS Plus Extra. But it is kind of crazy to see one of the first true exclusives for the PlayStation 5, despite the fact that it was a timed exclusive, leaving this service but remaining on Game Pass. And I feel like this lets us know that the same thing is going to eventually happen with Ghostwire Tokyo. I feel like Xbox is just going to remove that as soon as they can, because with the Spider's Web update, that game actually got really good. It was another situation where it was like the opposite of Deathloop, where at launch it got middling reviews. I'd say it was underrated. I played it at launch, I played it again with the Spider's Web update, and that made it 10 times better. There's like a horde mode added. They also added in rapid fire, so you could like aggressively SMG point, which made the game a lot more fun, because the biggest problem with it is its slow pace. It also improved the performance on PS5 just a little bit. It was already running pretty well, but it made it a little bit better. But yeah, that's a game that just came out at a weird time. Also having an exclusive by Bethesda come out after the Xbox acquisition basically let everyone know it's a timed exclusive. Something about it just didn't hit right. So I'm glad Tango is over at Xbox. They can still update the game, and they also got to put out Hi-Fi Rush, and in Hi-Fi Rush there is a tease for the Evil Within 3, so I really hope that happens. But if you want to take advantage of Deathloop, maybe download it to your PlayStation 5. I think you could probably beat it by September 19th. It's not the longest game in the world, and that's your opportunity to play it for free if you have extra. And also with Halloween coming up, maybe move Ghostwire Tokyo up your list as well, because that will eventually leave the service. Anyway guys, that's all I've got for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.